Welcome to the Honest Healing Podcast, real talk for cycle breakers. I'm your host, Katie Delamon. If you're ready to speak up, set boundaries, heal your nervous system, and build better relationships, you're in the right place. Because you don't need to be perfect to heal. You just need to be honest. Let's go. Welcome to episode 22 of the Honest Healing Podcast. Why eating disorders aren't about food. It's a conversation on safety, survival, and healing. In today's episode, I'm joined by a dear friend, Lexi Crouch, who's a nutritionist, an eating disorder specialist, and the co-author of the incredible book, ReNourish, a complete and compassionate guide to recovery from eating disorders. Lexi's story is not just inspiring, but it's a mirror for anybody who has ever struggled with control, worthiness, fear, or the desperate attempt to regulate an overwhelmed nervous system. We know that eating disorders are not really about food. They're about safety, it's about survival, and it's the body's attempt to cope when the mind feels powerless. And remember, when we start to starve our bodies, we starve our brains, right? So that's why we do these very irrational things. In this conversation, Lexi takes us into the moments that shaped her. The silence, the fear, and the wiring of a nervous system doing its best to protect her. We talk about her darkest moments being in a hospital, tied up to machines, almost dying, her turning points, and the myths she wants to destroy about recovery, and the message she hopes every single listener can hear, even if you have not struggled with an eating disorder. It is just a story on how these somatic tools like yoga and mindfulness can really shape any brain and any body. So settle in, soften your shoulders, and let's dive into this powerful conversation. All right. Well, welcome to the podcast, Lexi.
Thanks for having me, Katie. I'm so excited to be here.
Yes, well, thank you for joining me. You are a dear friend, a fellow yogi and yoga teacher, as well as a co-author of your newest book, ReNourish, a complete and compassionate guide to recovery from eating disorder, which we will get into. Now, let's actually just start with your story. So you've shared pieces and probably a lot of your story publicly, and I'd love to know what's a part of your journey most people don't know, and if you feel like you're ready to share now, and just give people a little overview of your journey.
Yeah, I'm like, life is a journey. So I feel like that is a very good place to start. And no, I just wanted to say some wonderful things about you too, Katie, while we're here. I feel like you give so much in the podcast space and all that you do online, and consider you just such a soul sister. So I am so thrilled to just dive right into this and talk a little bit about the journey. So I sit at 37 years old now. So seen a couple of things, I guess, halfway through of this physical existence, and have been known, I guess, for my background of growing up with an eating disorder or disordered eating. And this was a time back in, I guess, the 90s where we were transitioning in life. We were learning different things about health. We were learning different things about, I guess, humans in general. And as a child, that is the age where you were finding your way in the world. So I grew up with different messaging around from diet culture, what my parents were telling me, and I guess everything that we thought was the right way to be a good human. And I learned a lot about myself in this time where I was a very literal girl. I had these traits that still stick with me today. I can use them for my benefit. But at the time, when I was putting it into, I guess, a mold of how I thought the world wanted me to be through eating, I got into some extreme dieting and some extreme health compositions. So a very long history there. That took up a lot of my childhood and teenage years of some very distorted eating, which turned into an eating disorder. So getting a diagnosis around the age of 14, so that adolescence time, and I guess 14, where, you really start to arrive, I guess, in the world as a girl. You're going through a lot of hormonal changes, and, you go from little girl to teenage puberty years, and this is where the eating disorder fully took over.
Mm.
Give or take. that put me on a path of, I guess, looking inwards. So
Mm.
what I learned was when I was younger that an eating disorder was not so much, I guess, about how the world wanted me to be. It was more, I guess, a rebellion of following something that I thought that would keep me safe. So that went on. I never finished high school. I got taken out and diagnosed with anorexia nervosa and spent when I say many years, I guess a lot of my 20s and late teenage years in a hospital cycle being treated for anorexia, which I generally thought was going to be my life. So I learned a lot there about, I guess, being stuck, being in a hole, or having a coping mechanism to, I guess, be in physical existence. And my tool was an eating disorder. And I took it pretty far. I'm an intense girl. I've learned to love that about myself. And I would measure this through the intensity of an eating disorder. So, as many things do, what goes up must come down. And I guess this is a very short kind of version of, I guess, the trauma and the depth that I went through with the eating disorder. But around 25, I would say I got on path. And this was through, I guess, a lot of kicking and screaming, which many people do. It's not like you wake up one day and go, here's some answers. It came with a lot of resistance, but there must have been something deeply inside of me that went, I'm ready to look inwards. And lo and behold, went on a deep, what they say is recovery from an eating disorder, but I look at it as a journey of self-discovery or reconnection to myself, which has led me to where I am today, Katie.
Yeah, amazing. And can you just give an idea of, what did you get down to as far as weight so people can understand, the extremity of where you were at and like I even, maybe some of the journal entries that you were writing and, talk about like those low points. I want to sort of paint a picture for people to understand that, this did consume your life for what, 10 years?
Yeah, it must have definitely over 15 years and above.
Oof.
It was quite the journey.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
And
thank you for asking deeply too, Katie. I feel you go on a lot of things, like a lot of things, and I talk a lot about my story, but it does just come as a journey rather than getting into the nitty and the gritty. And we're talking here today, and you've known me past recovery, Katie. So you'd see me as a very bubbly, out there, bright kind of girl. Always have my challenges, but very different to how I was in the depth of the eating disorder. And when it comes to numbers, I'm just a bit cautious, just because a lot of people might be going through recovery, and I know that data can throw some people. But to give a picture of where I was health-wise, I was not in a great place. I was defined to a bed. I was fed through a tube, and I could barely stand up. When I was having a shower, a nurse would take me in for a wheelchair, and at some point in my life, I was given less than 24 hours to live. And in that hospital time as well, I saw many admissions. I saw up to 25 hospital admissions. So that was medical, that was ICU, that was many ways to just try and keep me alive. And it was very interesting when I talk about it. It wasn't that anorexia was the problem. Anorexia used to
mm,
make me feel great, but it was when it got a hold of me. And when I was searching for this feeling, I just started to get lower and lower because I could never maintain the feeling again. I know there will be some people listening out there who can't relate. And I always like to put it as an experience of perhaps if you've ever been in a toxic relationship before. So sometimes they can start off great, amazing. You're meeting somebody, you're spending a lot of time, you're feeling good about yourself, and you want more. So you keep investing in this relationship, and all of a sudden, when it is not healthy, you've got two different people with two different ideas, and you've got a push pull that goes on there. And all of a sudden, you just start questioning yourself. You can't reach that high that you reached at the beginning of the relationship, and you keep going lower and lower. That's much like anorexia, and that's much like having an eating disorder. So, just one of life patterns in disguise if you've never been through it yourself.
mm,
And yeah, it was really working for me for many years, Katie. I would say the first time I got put into hospital, I believed I didn't have a problem.
mm,
I thought I was modeling this level of perfection. I thought I was being healthy. I was in control. And I guess I'd always been a high achiever as well. at school. I'd been school prefect, and there was nothing that you could pull me up to say that I wasn't functioning. I was fully functional. So when I went into hospital for the first time, I'd become so ingrained in this eating disorder that I thought everybody else around me was essentially gaslighting me because they didn't
Mm,
have that discipline, they didn't have that structure. But that was that first experience of going against the eating disorder and getting stuck for many years. So it's really interesting because I did journal. Being a writer
mm,
like you, Katie, it's you spend many years just trying to, I guess, figure yourself out in some way. And that didn't come for me naturally. Like I wasn't a creative girl when I was in the eating disorder. I was very analytical. I was very black and white. And I would have said to you, there was not an ounce of creativity, and I didn't want to write because that would be me feeling something, I guess. But I would have come in and justify it as, a waste of time, or, I could
mm,
be doing something better that was going to be productive. But I did find it very healing. I remember I must have been around age 21, and I only tried some of these recovery or these self-discovery, as I like to call it, methods because I had hit rock bottom. And that's a very good place to start when you hit rock
mm,
bottom because you were forced to look at different things that might make you feel better. Other than that, you're quite ignorant. So I remember dismissing journaling. I thought it was silly, as I was saying. And then one day I must have gone, well, I've got nothing else. Why don't I give it a go?
mhm,
And I guess with the eating disorder as well, you're stuck in this mentality. You don't have any flexibility where you like to prove people wrong. So I remember starting to journal and go, all right, I'll do this just to prove to them that it didn't work. And some of those
mm.
biggest steps into recovery, actually, where, you kind of run with something and, yeah, really got to learn a lot about myself. And I guess that was a foundation as to how I actually learned to be a writer. So some pretty dark days. Got out of it, led to a pretty big path ahead of me, I guess, Katie.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And so you touched upon a little bit about how the role of culture, like the dieting culture, played a role in this. Was there any other role, like with family dynamics or your childhood play, that shaped the beliefs that led to the eating disorder? Or do you remember the dysregulation that you felt in your body, which you wouldn't have maybe known it then, but can you like recount what that was? Or, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely,
Mhm.
Katie. And it was quite funny because you only know what you know at the time. And saying openly here, like I love my mum. My mum is my best friend and my hero who sat with me by my side through my journey, through our ups and downs, and still is there today. However, we did grow up in quite a chaotic family life, which was
Mhm.
very interesting because that took me years to formulate. And I
Mhm.
think that is with trauma or saying, you only know what you know. That was kind of how I entered the world, I guess. So, I guess what looked like from a very, together family, which, I did. I grew up with a white picket fence. Everything was given to me on a silver platter, which can be quite the leading pathway to anorexia as well.
Mm,
There is, I guess, not I guess, there has been a saying that says, someone with an eating disorder can present to a doctor or professional and be looked upon from the outside to go, but you've been given everything.
yeah.
Here's a silver platter. Why are you doing this? Because something is shaped in their inner world that they're not feeling good. So
Hmm.
I guess when that came to home life, it was just a little bit turbulent. I grew up with an alcoholic father.
Hmm.
Dad, long behold, that is what you know at the time too. You don't have another dad to model any other behavior. And my parents got divorced when I was 7 years old. So I learned from a young age a lot of independence. So I was living between two houses, two different sets of rules, two different family, I guess, values because they weren't together as well. And I was just forced to grow up really quickly. So with this, I had this giant sense of control, which looking back, that was definitely a trauma response
Mm,
and why I grasped so deeply to the eating disorder. And my dad, on his own journey, has actually passed on now. The alcohol did get him at the end.
mm,
I always believed deeply, great soul underneath, but he had his demons, and that was for him to work on at the time. But a lot of his inner workings would come out and reflect to us when we were children as well. And a lot of that did have to do with my weight as well. So it
Mm,
was thinking that I wasn't good enough.
yeah.
If I just lost a little bit more, if I obtained this, that, I'd find my place in the world. But it wasn't just the messaging from my family, it was diet culture. It was everywhere. So I strongly believed that that's what I had to do to thrive and be not even a great person, just an okay person. So definitely my upbringing shaped that. And I went to boarding school when I was 14 as well. So that was with that independence of just trying to navigate this place. I guess growing up, I always felt that it was myself against the world.
Mm,
I never had that closeness. And
yeah.
my mum was amazing. My mum went on to be a nurse and provider for my brother and I. She went on to be a COO as well. So she worked very hard. And with that, she's just the most empathic, beautiful human you will ever meet. But that required a lot of work hours. So I was at boarding school, and I guess that lowered the stress of in between houses as well. But it definitely took me on this deep childhood journey to go deeper, gain that, I guess, that adult brains, that
Mm.
mindset that took me to why I wanted to recover later in life to backtrack and I guess see things differently. So that was a little bit about life.
Yeah, and your relationship with your mother would have gone through lots of phases and tension and stress. And, that doesn't mean you didn't love each other, but yeah, that must have been a journey in itself, having not only that relationship also with your father that was strained, but also with your mother for quite a while. And I think it just shines a light that no matter what you go through, you can grow through it,
Hmm.
that just because you may have had an eating disorder, there was a lot of tension and stress, that doesn't mean you can't have a beautiful, loving, emotionally mature relationship now.
Oh, absolutely. And again, like I cannot speak more highly of my mom, like best friends. And I look at her and I just went, you were the strongest woman alive. We went through
Mm,
a lot and she just took a breath. She went and, provided for our family. She just locked in and,
mm.
um, got us into a great situation where we could all live and thrive. And, who knows what she was going through at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a whole trauma for her as well. And, it goes back to her childhood stuff too. And, that's her journey.
Mm.
Yeah. And so, because I love the nervous system, as you know, how did dysregulation show up in your eating disorder? And how did regulation begin to change everything for you? And also, can you speak about what was that? You said at 25, you started that self-discovery journey. Was it
Mm.
a book? Was it a yoga class? And then also you have a beautiful daughter. Can you tell us, when that happened and just a little bit past there? Yeah, that timeline.
Yeah, yeah, and I'll jump into it because I know, with you, Katie, and myself, it's, we did find that path of yoga. And also with
Mm,
eating disorders, you were constantly self-reflecting.
mm,
It is this inner job. And I always look back and I had always been dysregulated from
mhm,
such a young child. And this, I mean, from the ages of 4 or 5, my grandma would report, I was constantly pulling out my hair. I would sit there and just pull it out, and I would bite my fingernails. And it was funny because in society, it was always don't put your fingers in your mouth, don't bite your
mm,
hair, thinking that this was just something that, you would do. And then
mhm,
it took me many years to go on living on the edge. I was constantly living on the edge and, this perfectionist mindset of having to be better, of walking on eggshells at all times from such a young age that, I remember learning about nervous system regulation, going on my yoga journey and going, oh, that was me just trying to get inside my body to feel myself while
mm,
my thoughts had just gone very extremely and intense. So these were all different parts of just trying to access being in the body and different states as well. So that's always been there since a child. And also just, I think life is complex. So it's
yeah,
never few reasons, like might not be family life entirely, like definitely the way that I'm wired as well, sitting there on the spectrum as well with autism. It's just I'm a very sensitive person, always have been. So my experience as well in life, give it to somebody else and they might have handled it very differently. But,
mhm,
I'm very thankful because it has led me to where I am today. And the long and the short, I guess, as to where I got on path at 25, it was going back to what we were talking about of I was so sick and tired of feeling sick and tired at this point of the eating
Mm,
disorder. So again, what I was saying, what goes up must come down. And because I got essentially so high with the eating disorder, you're accessing, I guess, this feeling. Because it's much like, again, if you're not familiar with eating disorders as well, that state of starvation can make you feel very good. We look back to, I guess, or even now, Buddhist monks or monks in general would go to the caves, they would go into starvation so that they could reach periods of enlightenment, essentially making them feel good and to access these higher states. So
mm.
I guess I wasn't doing the path correctly, Katie, but I was searching for something within.
You missed the other memo about meditation.
Yeah, different method, but still trying to seek that same feeling. And
Mm,
well, not sorry, not unfortunately, I guess gratefully, it wasn't working, so I was forced to look in different avenues. And this is why I guess I was in my eating disorder for so long. I would go to conventional treatment, and it wasn't that I didn't know how to recover. I knew about nutrition. I'd been studying it since age 7 and, could have some very great conversations with the dietitians that I grew up with. I knew all the steps at a logical level that I needed to recover from an eating disorder. Anyone that I've ever met that's been on the path, there's nothing fundamentally wrong with you. It's not that you don't understand at a logical level. You just can't do it or sit with the feeling
an
yet.
emotional level. It's not a physical knowing or an education problem. It's an emotional problem.
Thank you, Katie. You absolutely nailed it. And, you start to really question yourself too. Like we went through so many treatments, moving into state, every clinic, looking at it for every angle. My mum never gave up. And I just couldn't do it, and I kind of look back to be like, no, there's something that's got to run deeper here. So for me to get to a point of having to break out of this rigid mindset to, I guess, explore, because in eating disorders, it's about safety, it's about control. You are not going to put one toe out that would break a rule because you'd be living with this punishment. So
Mm,
the only way to get there was to get so entirely low that you had to try other options. And I really did. Like, I don't think there's ever any words to articulate that dark point that some people reach in life.
mm,
I mean, I must have been about 25 years old. I'd started to gain the weight. I was living in hoodies. And, Katie, we can tell listeners we live in a very hot part of the world as well. And there was nothing that I wanted to do to even embrace life. All of a sudden, you'd taken away something that used to make me feel good, and I was forced into mundane living, which was everything I was running from. So
mm,
I just couldn't, at a logical level, figure out what I was going to do. But I do believe when you do subconsciously get to a point that you've got to make a shift, you've got to make a change. It's not conscious. Sometimes you just sit with it. When you've had enough, it's like the body and the mind will start to connect and something will appear. And I really had, Katie, like I really, really had. I'd been in a coma. I'd come out of that. I thought I was going to die. Like I was ready to go. I was done with physical existence. So I really sat
wow.
in that place. And I remember when I came out, it's kind of like you get that option of, am I going to do this? Am I going to pass? Or am I going to keep going on with life? And I just remember there must have been something deep inside with me that just went one more time, Lexi. And it's
Mm,
very slow, but all of a sudden, and I can't remember what book says this, but it is a very spiritual kind of phrase. It says, when you are ready, the right teacher will appear.
when the student is ready, the teacher appears. Yeah, I don't know what book it is, but it also refers like this idea I always think of when the pain of staying the same is stronger than the pain of change, you will change. But the reason why you're not changing is because the pain of staying the same isn't enough yet.
Mm.
You do have to get to that point where it's just like this pain is too much. And so because changing requires a lot of pain, a lot of
Oh,
pain. And that's why people don't do it because
oh,
they haven't gotten to that low point.
100%. If I look back on the eating disorder, that wasn't a bad time. When I look at recovery, self-discovery, oh my goodness, strap yourself on. You are in for an experience. And, anyone, if you are listening, going through eating disorder
Any
recovery,
addiction, like
exactly.
any addiction, it's just addiction.
That's why there is resistance to step out of that space. It's not that there is any weakness. It's not that there is anything from there. It is just you are stepping into the unknown. And I guess when you've had that enough feeling, it will hit you quicker than a freight train.
Yeah.
So with that, I ended up meeting someone who became my therapist, and it was very different, Katie. We tried every doctor. My stepdad was also in the medical field as well, so we met some experts, all studied in eating disorders. But the difference was, I ended up meeting somebody who'd gone through life and had an experience himself. It
Mm,
wasn't with an eating disorder. He had his own path in drug and alcohol addiction. But again, it was two humans that learned to connect and it ran a lot deeper. I remember turning up because at this point I would just go to appointments because that's just what I did. And it was a little bit of fun as well because I'd been deemed to not recover, that I had severe enduring anorexia and it was life management. So sometimes it was just a little bit of fun, I guess, to be like, all right, let's see what this guy has to say. And it was more me interviewing them rather than them interviewing me. And I met this man and I couldn't figure him out. And, I was very in that analytical mindset as well, very smart, very cynical, that I thought had people figured out, in the first 2 seconds when I met him. And it was the strangest thing. He sat there and he didn't ask me any questions about my eating disorder, which I could
mm,
have listed. And, it was this extreme history that professionals would look at and go, this is out of my scope. I even had a doctor say to my parents, I'm the end of the line, doctor. What do you want me to do? So I met this guy and he didn't want to talk about it. And it really threw me. And then, lo and behold, it was enough to just get me to go back a little bit how we
mm,
should look at how we form connections with humans. You don't have to
mm,
look at them right away and go, I love this person. This is the person I want to spend the rest of my life with. We don't know them yet,
mhm,
And that's how we should look at therapy as well. You should look at, I like him enough to trust him a bit that I want to see him next time. And
mhm,
that relationship went on for, oh, he's still my therapist today. So we're talking almost 15 years as well. And it was more, he was just on a different path. So
mm,
with a combination of medical that I'd had through recovery in the beginning, this man was he was an acupuncturist, Chinese medicine
mm,
and looked at life very differently. And all of a sudden, health started to look very differently for me, and I was very
mm,
challenging at first too. I went, no, no, no. We live in a linear mindset where input versus output. This is what it is, follow the pathway, add up the calculations. That's how you be a good human, and that's how you reach health. And he never
mm,
questioned me because he was so resolved in himself. And
mm,
Lexi, really, she knows what she knows in that avenue. And he just let it unfold. So I went on this tremendous journey. And when we talk about healing, when we talk about recovery, it's you can have people there that can guide you, but it is you doing the work. And
mhm,
essentially, he was the one that I trusted to hold the space. And by kind of looking at where he was in life, I looked at him and I thought, you're amazing. Like I was 24, 25 years old, and he'd had this history of drug and alcohol addiction, and he'd gone on to be a therapist, very, very renowned. He'd written 3 books, I think he's up to 5 now, and just had this path. And it wasn't anything that he did, essentially. It was just his essence.
mm,
Being able to sit with me, this intense human that would run because he knew himself.
mhm.
And that was a space that allowed me to heal and essentially get to know myself. So, bit of a long one there, but
Would you say that was co-regulation? Like, was that the first adult who was very genuinely grounded, regulated in your presence, or at least that you can sort of remember and connect to?
yeah, and he runs deep, Katie. So there was a lot of pulse diagnosis, and there's lots of things with Chinese medicine that it is an ancient healing method. Like we
Mm,
don't always talk about this in conventional medicine, but there is mind-body connection. So the body holds on to what the
mhm,
mind has stored. And I remember him feeling my pulse. and, really tapping in. And he paused and he went, "You've never trusted anyone in your life."
Mm,
Really taken back because, I have a lot of walls up. I had a lot of control. No one could get into this. Like,
mhm,
I was the one running the show with this eating disorder. And I just remember sitting there going, I didn't even know what that meant to trust anyone. I've
mm,
been running this ship my whole life. And I just remember the pause. It was just sitting in this space of silence for a moment where I probably didn't have that, because
yeah.
everything was just so analytical. It was like, let's fix a problem, let's jump in there. And I remember pausing and going, he's not wrong. And yeah, it just was years of building a trusting relationship with my therapist, essentially. And he didn't do anything. He never told me what to do, Katie. In fact, he
Mm,
would do a lot of things that were very unconventional. And he had a conversation with my mother and said, if we ever want to get anywhere with her, you need to stop judging her and she needs to go out and explore. So I got this freedom to just go try to figure out who I was, how I
mm.
ticked, make some mistakes, coming back. And there was somebody who was there that would just sit with me, I guess. So,
That's how you build self-trust is by being out in the world, by making mistakes, by then having that safe space to come back to.
yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
And that was at the age of 25. And that's why I do get passionate. You call it recovery, but it was
Mm.
self-discovery. I'd never been this person before. So it was coming back home. And, I'm big into recovery is reconnection. So that was the path that I started to take.
Yeah, well, speaking of recovery and reconnection, let's talk about your book, ReNourish. You have co-authored with Warren Ward, who is a psychologist, but not your psychologist, just a friend. And yeah, let's talk about your book. What,
Yeah, yeah. Oh,
I
sorry, I
mean,
was just going to say, Warren, he's actually a psychiatrist.
oh,
So,
psychiatrist,
yeah,
yes.
yeah, but very profound human. One of my favorite out there.
Yeah, and how did you two meet?
Very interesting. So, Warren, again, that was just a slight introduction as to how much love and just I'm just so in awe of him as a human. So, he is also a human who talks openly about his healing journey as well. He does a lot of somatic therapy and always exploring himself. And we actually met. So when I stepped into the space of recovery, it was when you start healing, your story comes out there. And
Mhm.
I remember making a promise because, again, I didn't think I would ever recover. So I would make these really out there statements just to, kind of mess with the universe. Or, I wasn't deeply connected as I am now, and I'll never take that for granted. But, I think they kind of laugh at me because I remember a very dark moment. I was at home hitting rock bottom, and I can't remember exactly what I was going through, but I was on my bathroom floor just crying, breaking down, talking to whatever was out there because you do get to that point, you've got to go, maybe I'll try that. And I said out loud going, if there's anybody listening, if there's something out there, I promise if I can recover, and I use the words, if I could just be normal, which I take back because I didn't really
What
want
is normal, but still.
exactly. But this is, when you're on your young journey, I said, I will dedicate my life to helping others to get through this. So I'm a girl of my
Yeah.
word. You know me well enough, Katie. If I say I'm going to do it, I am going to do it. So
Yep.
with that, I feel like I was gifted like this tremendous path beyond that to focus on recovery and give back. So I started talking. And I found myself in hospital wards. I found myself presenting to young psychiatrists, to many people who wanted to talk to somebody who'd been through something that I was never meant to recover from. I wasn't meant to make it out alive. I looked death in the eye so closely, so many times that, it really is. I guess sometimes I'm probably not, I guess because you're on a journey and you don't really stop to sink to where you are. But sometimes I really look back and it's these conversations to go, no, you were there, Lexi. It was very serious. So, I,
Yeah, I
yeah,
actually didn't realize how serious. Like you've never talked about any of this with me, and so I'm hearing all this like coma stuff for the first time, and I'm like, wow, that being fed by a tube. Like I didn't know about this. This is yeah.
Yeah, it was, I'm just backtracking a little bit, but it is that level of gratitude where you meet with some people. And I know, Katie, for me, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's the sunrise. And sometimes I have people around me being like, yeah, cool, it's the sunrise. But imagine if you never saw the sunrise because you were laying in a hospital bed your whole life. So
Mm,
me jumping outside in the mornings, that just does it for me, and I'll never take that for granted. But
mm,
getting back to Warren, I started talking, and one day I found myself presenting to some young psychiatry registrars. So they were wanting to know about eating disorders, and I turned up. And I was quite new into my journey, but I was really finding out who I was. So I spent a few years quite mute from the eating disorder. So I didn't speak. I had a carer. Like, we're talking to this level that someone would communicate for me. But when
mm,
you start finding your voice, you really start finding your voice. I just
mm,
can't even stress enough that I was not this vibrant person that I am today. So I started talking, and I remember going, oh, I feel like everybody wants a in the mold story. And, a lot of people think that it's you don't recover from eating disorders. A lot of people think it's symptom management that,
mm. You
you know,
live with it forever.
mm. And I went, no, 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 this is a journey. And if I can get over someone who thought was going to be my soulmate in what year that was and not think of them again, I can do that with my eating disorder. And
Yes.
it's exactly how I felt, because that's also that's the same pattern in a different form.
Mm.
And
Thank you for pointing that out.
it's so true. That's how I feel.
Mm,
And I went on to talk, and Warren was there. He wasn't a doctor that I saw. He wasn't anyone that I had, I guess, any treatment from as well. We just crossed paths, and I was putting my foot into the ground here, like stepping into, I guess, the eating disorder space as well, because it was very unconventional.
mm.
Here we had this was a medical issue. This was a psychiatric issue where, you had to be very formulated, cross this. So having someone to go, yeah, I've been on this experience, like this was brand new territory for me. So I
Yeah.
went in, spoke my truth, and down the back of the room, I saw we had the registrars, but we also had the older psychiatrists, and I saw them like almost pulling out their hair. And I was having a conversation like this, like I was really talking about it from afar. It wasn't so much that I was in the eating disorder, it was just, I was very removed from it. And I walked away, and I sat in my car, and I went, oh, I think that went horribly wrong. I really don't think that was well received at all. But I remember going, you know what, but I feel really good. And that's my truth. So I
Mm,
went away, and I just remember going, oh, I should probably avoid eating disorder world for a little bit now. Like, I think I triggered some of those psychiatrists roaring up the back there as well. Long and behold, I turn up to events, and I think I kind of steer the room and, say hi and move along. And then it was a couple of years later, Warren reached out. I got this email, and he said, you may not remember this, Lexi, but you gave a talk at, it was Prince Charles Hospital in this year. He went, I've never been so blown away by the way that you could just talk about your eating disorder and where you are today. And I'd sat there because that's human dynamics, isn't it? Here I was thinking he'd had this awful experience pulling out his hair. He was rubbing his head because he thought it was profound. So
yeah.
he approached me and said, Lexi, like, he is the most passionate man about eating disorder healing. Like, he is out there making a difference every day. Like, his heart is just in there to heal humans. And he came up and he goes, Lexi, with your knowledge and my knowledge and just the way that you speak, I think we should write a book together. So
Mm,
we jumped in together, and we're both on this healing journey. So he's resolved enough to go, this is what I can offer, and this is what Lexi brings. And I'm exactly the same. It's two different mindsets. So we put it together, and it's quite a revolutionary book. You've got a doctor and a past patient talking about eating disorder recovery. And honestly, it was one of those things as well that when you were inspired and you were on your mission, it just came together. So we've become great mates since. And, I couldn't think of anyone better to be on the ride with.
oh, I love that. I love that. So, what's one myth about eating disorder recovery you were determined to dismantle in the book? And is it that you live with it forever, like myth?
Yeah, and that
Yeah.
is a big one.
Yeah.
Um, and I can sit here and I can honestly and openly say, I do not struggle with food, weight, or shape. That is something that has gone. And it's quite interesting because everybody looks at anorexia or eating disorders as a physical illness.
Mm,
Absolutely is not. It is pure analysis of the mind. You
mm-hmm,
were stuck with calculations. You were stuck with this data. You're not free, and you're just
mm-hmm,
controlling your body to do so. So, true recovery from an eating disorder, where you gain freedom, where you gain that peace, is you're not constrained to your mind anymore. So, that's where I believe it's possible. And there are pathways. For me, I would have been cynical of going, how does this happen? And that was a yoga path for me. It's something that I'm very dedicated to because you're
mm-hmm.
learning to free your mind and you're learning to free your body and find that inner peace as well. So, I used to be, I guess, if I turned up to society, you would have looked at me years ago and gone, Lexi would have made a great lawyer. Just so calculated like that. Whereas I went on the yoga journey and now it's less thoughts,
Mm,
calculations, less of that. So I guess that is a myth that I like to bust, that it is absolutely possible to recover from an eating disorder, but you do have to invest in yourself. You do have to put in the work to become that version. And I'm really glad you asked that too, Katie, because this is just one way of recovering from an eating disorder. That's not the be all to the answer to solutions. It would happen for other people as well, but this is how I found my freedom. And I know that I do put the work in daily, as you know. So I turn up, I have my non-negotiables. It doesn't look so strict as when I was in exercise addiction with anorexia. It's something where I can tap in and go, what do I need to do today? And have my set kind of, I guess, ways, which is my yoga and my self-regulation that makes me feel good. And once I've done that, the day is open to what happens.
yeah. And it is just nervous system regulation 101, stress management, time, energy management. Like it's kind of all the same umbrella, but it's learning how to live moment to moment, mindfulness,
Mm,
and to just keep coming back to that present moment. Okay, what do I need? What do I need right now? Not thinking about the future or that past part. And when we drop the control and bid for connection,
mm.
I love Gabor Mate's quote. It was also a trauma and a recovery like specialist. He says that safety is not the absence of a threat, it's the presence of connection.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you can have threats coming at you, but if you've got connection to self, to body, and feeling safe,
Mm.
like safety is not like not having a threat or stress. It's being able to move with it and being connected to your body. And that's essentially, I guess, what, I believe, because I was definitely a functional alcoholic in my 20s and I don't struggle with drinking now.
Mm.
And nothing against the AA community. I've never been a part of it, but there's something that has always irked me a little bit about it, of this idea of going and continuously labeling yourself as the alcoholic.
Mm.
I find that, like, and I believe, it's done amazing things for the world, but is that like having that label of like, I'm still an alcoholic, I still have an eating disorder, like, does that actually move us forward?
Yeah, and Katie, I do have a bit to say on this. In my personal belief is, my biggest win in life now is not the success that, comes with work or the media that I'm placed in. My biggest success is I can eat the cake, or essentially, I think I just put a post on Instagram yesterday about I can eat the donut, taste the donut, I can walk away from the donut and get on with my life now. So I'm
Mm,
still can have that a part of my life. Whereas I guess if it's other addiction as well, if that's alcohol, it's can you have the one drink? Can you say no? Can you listen to what you need and still have it? In some
mhm,
level, it's, avoidance. And I'm big into not having food avoidance. It's,
mm,
it doesn't mean that it's going to be perfect. I know
mhm,
recovery from an eating disorder is messy. You're learning your satiety for the first time. You're learning to actually feel in your body
yeah.
and all these different things. So you're not going to have this perfect eating plan that goes, I'm going to gain some weight and I'm going to test some foods. It might be, that, it's gone a bit out of, I guess, control or something, but
Mhm,
you're learning to feel that feeling and then come back to your regulation. And I'm with you, Katie. My life is self-regulation. And I
mhm.
sit here and I've had some wild things happen since eating disorder recovery. Like that was that was mild as to what life has thrown me since. But it comes back to what I can do for myself to feel good, and that's safety within. And it's you will
Mm,
never be able to control life, but if you can start to control your inner world, you start to get that nice reference point. And it's what you were talking about with the alcohol too, Katie, is you can sit there and you can really feel what you need in that
mm,
sense. And you know when to start, you know when to stop, and you just don't think about it. And that's with
mhm,
eating disorder as well. My win is I know when to eat, I know when to stop, and that comes round and I embrace it. I'm someone that embraces cravings. I'm
mhm,
someone that, I get very excited if I feel like chocolate today because there's an end point. It's not forbidden. So it's this freedom that comes with that. And, I know everyone's on their different journeys, but this is something that I feel both you and I have worked for of just coming
mhm.
back home to yourself, and recovery is reconnection.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know we'll jump off in just a minute or two, but I did want to talk a little bit about Ozempic because you have spoken about this topic and how this is a crisis for especially the eating disorder world. But, as you're also a clinical nutritionist, so can you speak a little bit more about how the red flags and what you're seeing and what, the future potentially could hold?
Yeah, and it is a very big issue. It's very popular at the moment. And I do work in obviously the nutrition space. So I am a clinical nutritionist, and I niche in eating disorders. And with that, I do get a lot of teenagers. And I've seen in the field too where teenagers and children are getting the wrong message about Ozempic. And this is something to point out that Ozempic itself is not new. There have always been weight loss drugs and I guess different ways to control your weight through these methods. And that was something that I experienced when I was growing up. It was a different form, but we had diet pills in our house, and I
Hmm.
thought that that was a safe way to get lower when I was already at a lowered weight. But when it comes to Ozempic, it's quite serious with this one because we're messing around with glucose, our blood sugar regulation. We're messing around with our homeostasis as well. And I don't think everyone is clearly thinking about what is this going to do for my health. A lot of people are thinking about what is this going to do for my weight, which I need to remind people in my field, those are two completely different things. Weight loss does not mean that you are healthy.
Hmm.
So, I guess it definitely has its place for patients that are seeing doctors that they're prescribed and as a short-term solution. We're not thinking long-term here, but it is not for everybody. We've learned, the science tells us that balance in lifestyle is the number one factor that is going to help you maintain those healthy levels that we need in our life. So it is an issue that we need to look at and know that there aren't any quick fixes. And my biggest concern in the space that I am is the safety of our health. This is not something that you should be looking at yourself. You need to have a health professional on board because of the serious health complications that come with it.
Yeah, and we also know that I think it's 90% of people who go off of it gain all the weight back. You actually have to be on it forever. And, if you're diabetic and you're in your 70s, 80s, like, and you're taking 5 insulin shots a day, sure, talk to your doctor. This is, probably a much safer, better option for you and your lifestyle and your goals. But if we're like teenagers, 20 something year olds, like that to me is just mind blowing that people have access to it.
Yeah, and it is. And it's, at the end of the day, Katie, the path that we're on, and I will say this openly, lifestyle takes work. You
It
know,
does.
I watch you and I watch myself, and I know we show up daily. That
Hmm.
is something that we've chosen to do work. And, when we look at this, and I'm not dismissing this as, some people might need it for health
Yeah.
in that aspect. And that is for a doctor. That is not my scope. However, when we look at these younger generations, when it's not needed, I guess for something for weight loss as well, we need to look at methods that are safe, methods
Mm.
methods that are going to be healthy. And, in my space, I'm a clinical nutritionist, as I say, every research method of, I guess, I'm not a believer in diets at all, but, longevity, such as the Mediterranean diet or some of the ones that have been researched, all include balance. There's no extremes of messing around with our blood sugars or, taking something there. It comes back to balance is key. And also, what I'm trying to get out there with the message in ReNourish, our book, diets do not work. You know,
Mm,
much like we're talking about, when you don't have balance, what goes up must come down. So, whether that's diets, talking about Ozempic, whether that's eating disorders, alcohol, everything that we've discussed today is balance is key. And it's at work. It's all about the return. Every single day, you're going to wake up and, you've gone a little bit far off. It's about bringing it back for a little bit. And that's a human journey, learning to be kind to ourselves, learning not to be perfect and embracing it because that brings you into the present moment. And as I've learned, it can be gone quicker than you arrived. So
that's
health is
it.
a journey.
That's it. So, one last and final question. When you look back at your younger self, the one struggling in silence, what do you wish someone had asked you, or what would you say to her, little Lexi?
Let me have a little think about this because I want to answer this one properly. I just kind of look at like how interesting the world was back then that we all thought that we had to fit into a mold or a protocol to survive as humans.
Mm,
I want to look back and I would just want to say, geez, you're so cool. Like I was such a quirky little kid and, I have a quirky personality to begin with to just go, keep doing you. Like say the weird things, love what you love because you were just so passionate. And I guess if I had had, that experience of just nobody talking about my body or nobody telling me about who I needed to be, I would have loved to seen how that would have unfolded. But basically, I would have wanted to come back to what I tell my clients, what, I openly can say at any time, you were loved, you were worthy, you were doing enough, and it is going to work out. The harder the path sometimes, the cooler the journey after. So,
mm,
be in the moment. And, it's a lot of 20-year-olds too, I say, like, because that is so many of your years at that time where you think you got to have the house, the marriage, the relationship, and there's a lot of stress with that. I sit at my near 40s now and I look back to 20s, I'm like, enjoy, travel, forget to book your ticket. So,
mm.
these are the days that we're not going back. And looking back at as a little girl, I just want to say, you're doing good. Yeah.
Oh, yes, I love that, little Lexi. Well, thank you again for your time, your wisdom, your energy, and your knowledge.
Oh, no, thanks for everything, Katie. Always in awe of you. And yeah, love you so much and all that you do. So thank
Mm.
you.
Thanks, Lex. Thanks for listening to the Honest Healing Podcast. I absolutely love sharing these stories of everyday average people defying the odds and doing things differently, somatically, and helping their own nervous system by becoming inner confident with themselves. I really, really love this work, and I'm so inspired by all these people with all these stories. And I hope that you are enjoying them as well. In the new year, I'll be probably doing a few more solo episodes than having guests on. And I'm still deciding if I'm going to change the name. So look out for that in 2026. And if you want to read about my wild ride from mindlessness to mindfulness, you can always check out my memoir, Trust the Flames. You can buy it anywhere they sell books. Amazon is usually the quickest and the cheapest and the fastest. If you want to know more about me or how we can work together, you can always jump on my website, www.katiedelamont.com. You can book in a free strategy call if you think one-to-one coaching is for you. And also, if you just want to follow my work on social media, I am really only on Instagram these days, but everything is just my name, Katie Delamont. Till next time.